Now we are seeing it play out internationally in one of the core Olympic sports. In fact, the only sport specifically created for the Olympic Games, modern pentathlon. Alex Watson is a 3-time Olympian and was competition manager for modern pentathlon at the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. This week in London, he announced he was challenging the president of the international body, Germany's Klaus Schurmann, who's been in the role for 30 years. Some of the sport's highest-profile athletes believe it's time for him to move over.
Well, Tracy, what has happened, unfortunately, is that as a result of unfortunate incidents at Tokyo 2020 in the horse riding, where a German rider horse refused to jump and then she lost a chance to win the gold medal. She was in gold medal position, Annika Slew. Her coach punched the horse and she was removed from the competition and the coach was sent home from the games. But that unfortunate incident was really just the tip of the iceberg in the mismanagement of the sport by the International Federation. And unfortunately, those two Olympic official and the athlete were made the scapegoats for really the failings of the international body.
Let's talk a little bit about those failings, because the IOC President Thomas Bach specifically said change or be changed. Now, those that run the sport have recommended a change. What is it and why don't you like it?
Well, what they've recommended as a result of the situation in Tokyo, which is what they claim is the catalyst for it, is a switch to obstacle racing or ninja warrior as the fifth discipline in modern pentathlon instead of riding, instead of show jumping. And the reason the athletes are in protest about this is that the athletes haven't been consulted, the athletes have not been taken into the debate, they haven't been told the truth by the International Federation, and as it turns out, the fit with obstacle racing is not something that was brought up after Tokyo. It's actually been a business arrangement the UIPM has been working on since 2016 in secret. The reason we know is that we have obtained a copy of a draft contract dated April 2016, which was going to be signed between the International Obstacle Racing Federation and the UIPM.
Now, the UIPM, the governing body, has staged a series of test events around the world, and they say the athletes actually like the obstacle racing. But you've done your own survey with athletes and you found the complete opposite. So where does the truth lie in those two alternate truths?
Okay, well, the International Federation, the President Klaus Schurmann, would like everyone to believe that the athletes are very excited about losing riding and introducing obstacle racing. But the surveys that have been done independent of the UIPM show in all the surveys that have been done that over 90% of the current athletes do not want riding replaced. They want better management of the sport, and they want the sport better promoted and better governed. The Athletes Commission of the UIPM is the only athlete body that is saying they want obstacle racing, and it's made up of athletes who are totally under the control of the UIPM. They're not allowed to speak independently, and in fact, when they were shown what the obstacle racing agreement would look like, they were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, so they weren't able to communicate with their own athlete fraternity about what the UIPM were doing.
Has the International Olympic Committee become involved in any way or responded to your correspondence?
They have, in that they've made it clear that they want the athletes brought into the process and that the athletes must be listened to. And we've made representations to the IOC that just isn't happening, and that we would like the IOC to monitor the situation. The IOC have told the UIPM that they're waiting for their proposals on the replacement of riding, but the UIPM had put out originally that the IOC insisted on the removal of riding and wouldn't consider any future for the sport with riding, but that is not correct. The IOC have never demanded the removal of riding. They have asked the UIPM to resolve the problem and come forward with a proposal that is going to meet the IOC criteria for re-inclusion into the Games.
I suppose one of the big problems confronting many sports these days is how do you keep your particular sport relevant? You need to reduce costs because they are trying to bring down costs of hosting Olympic Games. You need to increase revenue and you need to make it entertaining to grow the market. Do you think modern pentathlon as it exists now can do those things, or do you think there might be some merit in changing one of the disciplines, in this case horse riding, to something that has proven to be rather popular, Ninja Warrior style obstacle racing?
Okay, it's a really good argument and a really good issue. And yes, the sport must evolve like all sports, and it must obtain an audience. And it can't and it shouldn't just rely on survival from Olympic revenue. It has to stand on its own feet. And for me, we proved that this could be done really with the staging of the Sydney Games. The events for pentathlon, with the first time for women in the Games, it was a very successful presentation of the sport, and it opened the door for the UIPM to really get the sport functioning more broadly, bigger development plans, more sponsorship, and to become independent just of relying on being an Olympic sport. But unfortunately, they didn't take that forward. They haven't managed it well, and now we're in a situation where we're still totally dependent on staying in the Olympic Games at all costs.
So one of the intriguing factors here, and we know that there is big time politics and pressure applied at these top levels of sports governing bodies, and the Vice President of the UIPM that governs your sport is also an IOC member who has eyes on the presidency of the IOC next time that becomes available, Juan Antonio Samaranch Jr. How are you going to deal with that, given he obviously supports the direction the UIPM is going, and you're saying that they should not, they should reverse that, but he's very senior inside the Olympic movement?
Well, he is very senior and he's a very important figure, and he's an important member of the executive board. What we understand about his position is that he wasn't one of the key people pushing obstacle racing, and he has been quoted himself as saying that this is a gamble, his own words, a big gamble by the UIPM. My position on this is that we would very much like to have his involvement in the sport going forward, but we also believe that we need to examine how the sport is managed, and we need to try and, if you like, model ourselves more on the FEI with their management of equestrian. They're at the top of the rankings for governance, and it continues to be a growing sport globally. It's not horse riding and equestrian that's the problem. When you examine the FEI's management of their sport, they're obviously doing something very well.
Is it the athlete body that you are relying on here, and what sort of support are you knowledgeable that you have confirmed? Because with a lot of these things, we hear people talking, one-on-one, saying, yeah, I support you, and then, they walk out the door and they say to the other colleague, yeah, I support you, and you never really know which way it's going to go until the vote is flushed out. So how confident are you that you have the support of a majority of the athletes, and how influential will they be in the vote?
Well, I believe I have the support of the athletes through the communication I've had with athletes in many countries that the sport is involved in, and also through the Olympic champion and current world champion CHOONG, who's been the ambassador really for the athletes in this fight with the UIPM. The other side of the equation, of course, is the national federations. They're the power base of the sport. They are supposedly the ones that decide on the future direction of the sport. And I've spoken to many of the National Federation executives, presidents. At the moment, the majority of active federations support the retention of riding, but they're all frightened by the UIPM. Some of them have been intimidated and threatened about sanctions or punishment if they don't toe the UIPM line. And this goes to this whole governance issue and the way the sport's being conducted. We have concrete evidence of the UIPM threatening to take international events away from federations if they don't follow the UIPM line.
Alex Watson, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you for your time.
The current Olympic men's champion in modern pentathlon is Great Britain's CHOONG. He's been one of the drivers pushing for change in the way the sport is governed and promoted.
When this whole thing started, over a year ago now, we were just looking for anyone who would be able to help. Obviously, some people have moved on with their lives. So, I don't know, ex-Olympians who used to be involved in the sport have got different careers now and didn't have time. So we were kind of just looking for anyone who might be able to make a difference. And Alex was one of those people who's, as he said, it's the he's at a point in his life where he's just sold his equestrian business, and he's kind of looking for a new challenge. And he's obviously very passionate about modern pentathlon as well. So it just sort of worked that this would really suit him and work for him. And it's been great for us to have someone willing to step up and challenge the current leadership.
In the days since the announcement has been made, have you heard from the UIPM?
No, they've not reached out to speak to me or anyone else as far as I'm aware. They have had a press release sort of acknowledging the leadership challenge, but other than sort of reiterating their stance that the majority of athletes support obstacles, there's been no response.
Do you recognise that something needs to happen in modern pentathlon to keep it relevant and to help it grow and expand?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I've tried to make that as clear as possible. I don't think the sport can stay as it is and continue to exist in the Olympic movement or be successful. I think we need new ideas to match the demands of newer markets. One of the big things is that the riding event hasn't been worked on in the last 2 decades. And not just from a sort of athlete as well as horse welfare point of view, but in terms of just the excitement. At the moment, it's just a show jumping round, and everyone does the same course, and it's cool. People who are really into horses will enjoy watching it, but to attract the new audiences, I think we need a much more exciting format, as well as to update those welfare issues that were obviously seen at Tokyo 2020.
Why would you be against Ninja Warrior style obstacle course racing? Have you done that yourself?
I've never given it a go, but that said, I'm not against Ninja Warrior obstacle sport on its own. I'm sure if I went and had a day out with the squad as a fun day, I would absolutely love it, and I've got nothing against it. My problem with the replacement process is that if you look at the International Obstacle Course Federation on its own as how close it is to being an Olympic sport, it's nowhere near got the required level of development. I don't know as of today, but I know when we were looking into it, say 2 months ago, it wasn't even a signatory of the WADA code. So it wasn't even, none of the obstacle athletes had ever been under the drugs testing rigor that I've had to do for my entire career. And there were so many other things like access to federations. Obviously, Ninja Warrior is a TV program with a huge broadcast, but the actual competitive sport side of it is hugely underdeveloped. There's barely a pathway for youth athletes to go into obstacle course racing. And so I think that purely selecting a competition based on a TV show is a very questionable process. And on top of that, there's all the problems with the selection process of obstacle course in the first place. Going back to 2016, there was that merger documents between the UIPM and the Obstacle Course Federation, and that was all done in secret. And it obviously never transpired, but the fact that they were sort of flirting with merging at that time and never told any federation, to me suggests that it's sort of been going on behind the scenes for a long time and lacks the sort of vigor of due process.
So in order to bring about this change that you are advocating for, you would need to convince a majority of the national federations.
Yeah.
So is that work ongoing? What sort of response have you had from any? How is that going to unfold? Because you've only got a couple of weeks before the Congress. Yeah.
So this is where I think I have quite a unique position. I'm obviously Olympic champion, which gives me an important voice and one that is very difficult to sort of silence. So I've seen that as a bit of responsibility to speak up for other athletes that have felt maybe more scared to voice their opinions. But at the same time, I'm still just an athlete. I'm not fully involved in Congress and going to national federations and talking with CEOs and presidents and the like. So I'm aware of some of the work that's been going on. Like, I believe there is a good collection of national federations who are sort of conferring with each other and discussing what the best action to take at Congress will be. But in terms of going out and actually making contact with them, that's not really my role within the sport. So I haven't had a huge amount to do with that.
Well, Joe, you've got the defence of your Olympic gold medal coming up in Paris in 24. None of us know whether you'll also get the chance to do something similar beyond in LA 28, perhaps Brisbane 2032. But we appreciate your time today and wish you every success.
Thanks, Tracy.
The Ticket.
The silver medalist at the Rio 2016 Olympics was France's Elodie CLOUVEL. She's currently ranked number 3 in the world and is one of the modern pentathletes who supports the dropping of riding. The international governing body declined an interview with the Ticket. However, its media operations manager Florent Boas kindly volunteered to translate my interview with Elodie.
In the beginning, I was quite, let's say, shocked. It came out as a shock to me. I started out pentathlon in 2008, and I could choose between pentathlon and triathlon, but the riding element of pentathlon was appealing to me. I really wanted to learn riding.
D'équitation qui m'a toujours fascinée en fait. Au début, c'était
Yes, in the beginning, she was submerged by emotions. I think as all of us athletes, and then looking back at things, she started to trust in the future. The resistance that she was feeling then got changed because she started to trust the explanations from that she got from the French Federation and the International Federation. She believes in the evolution of the sport, and her dream is that modern pentathlon will become the greatest sport, and that the profile of modern pentathlon will become greater than what it is now.
Ultime du pentathlon moderne.
I know that she has looked at the foundations of the sport, and modern pentathlon is the only sport that was created specifically for the Olympic Games by the founder of the modern Olympic Games, Baron Pierre de Coubertin. And so many of those that are arguing to retain horse riding argue that because they say they must try to keep with the traditions of the founder. How do you respond to that?
Eh ben, je vais prendre l'exemple des cellules.
Okay, so she started by having a metaphor of the cells in our body that cannot stay still, otherwise they die. And she uses the same metaphor for modern pentathlon. We are the last of the IOC broadcast numbers at every edition of the Games. The sport is not the sport that has a lot of mediatic attention. She's coming from swimming. She's been doing pentathlon for 13 years now, and she wants this media attention. She wants this greatness for the sport of modern pentathlon. She also mentioned that Pierre de Coubertin was a visionary. He created the modern Olympic Games. He created the modern pentathlon. So now it's time to have this modern element in our sport again, and that there's a need for evolution.
En 1900, c'était un prérequis de monter à cheval.
She said that in the 1900s, when the sport was created, it was a prerequisite to be able to do horse riding, to shoot with real bullets and so on. But now there's a need to live with our time, because we are in the modern Olympic Games. So there's a need to live with the time of our society. It's not about breaking the DNA of our sport, because it's not ancient pentathlon anymore. It's modern pentathlon.
The group of athletes who want to retain horse riding say that the horse riding itself is not the problem. They say that it is the management of the sport. I'm aware, Florent, you're working for the governing body, so all due respect to you. But I would like to get Elodie's response to that and whether she thinks the horse riding is the problem or does there need to be changes in the way the sport is managed?
Mon opinion là-dessus, c'est que
She basically said that riding is too elitist, that a lot of countries cannot practice horse riding. She herself is lucky to be able to ride great horses, but it's not the same everywhere. And she's also thinking about the other countries in the world, and she is thinking about the generation.
Et c'est ça le plus important. Moi, sincèrement, aujourd'hui,
she said that she has trust in the international federation. She has trust in the leadership. She is not fearing anymore. She mentioned that those who are still against this change are basically scared of change. She says that resistance is normal in the beginning, but now is the time to come together. There's a need for a union. We need to have synergies together to be able to grow. She mentioned also that it's really important to be able to adapt yourself to your environment, and she ended up by saying that there's a need to have a union with the federation, and that she trusts the French Federation and the International Federation.
And Elodie, have you spoken with this other group of athletes? Do you think there is somewhere in the middle where everybody can meet and the sport can retain some strength or build some strength? Or do you think the damage now is irreparable?
Alors, mon côté très optimiste.
So she says that she is an optimistic person. She believes in life. She says that we will come to a time for unity. Of course, some people need more time to be able to trust and to open themselves. It is a total renewal of our sport. So it's a step-by-step process that takes a little bit of time. She indeed spoke a little bit with some people that are against that change, but she also said that when someone is close to an idea, it's very difficult to convince them. And she herself is a respectful person, but she ultimately said that actions speak louder than words, and when this change is put into place, people will see with their own eyes that this was needed.
On soit tous unis finalement.
Elodie CLOUVEL, silver medalist from Rio 2016, and Florent Boas from the UIPM, who's done the translations today. Thank you both very much.
Thank you very much, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy. Merci beaucoup.
The ticket.
Dozens of Olympic medalists put their names on a letter to the IOC asking for intervention, and hundreds of others signed a petition regarding the UIPM's plans for change. The athlete-driven campaign that has voiced its lack of confidence in the running of international modern pentathlon has been thoroughly detailed in a book called Athletes Pressing Charges. It's a book all sports administrators would find interesting. The author is Professor Jörg KRIEGER from Aarhus University, currently in Seoul. He believes we're witnessing a zeitgeist in international sport.
Yes, that's right. We see that in many sports, particularly in Olympic sports, of course. That has a very long history of amateurism, where athletes did not play a major role in decision making and were kind of suppressed, and that is certainly changing at the moment. So I wouldn't say that this will change very quickly. This is a long process, and over time, though, I think athletes will be able to achieve a better position in that overall power game. But change is happening, and we see it. If we think only about athletes representation and athletes commissions, that we don't have that for a very long time. That's only been taken serious over the last 10, 20 years.
Are the athletes commissions that come under the auspices of the governing body a first step to a better system of governance, or is the widespread criticism of them completely justifiable in that they really have no authority and they're kept under the control and the influence of spreading whatever the wish may be of the governing body?
And opinion is really split about this. We certainly, the more critical voices, and I would include myself here, we would argue that these athletes commissions are just a tool of those in power to sort of demonstrate, okay, we include the athletes, but they don't really have that much power, and particularly in the international sport federations. The IOC is a little bit different here because its organizational structure is different. But if we're talking about modern pentathlon and other sporting governing bodies of sport, then I believe it's very difficult for them to actually have an impact. But it also we need to look at them individually as well. And some of international sport federations take them more seriously, and it's really a democratic process, and athletes are voted in. The IFs have no choice of who is on the commissions. But in other federations, it's not like that, where those in power reserve themselves the right to appoint people to those commissions.
Can you give some examples of what has happened in this particular case?
Yes. So, of course, the whole story is about the horse riding discipline, first and foremost. I mean, that is what causes the entire controversy. And when it came down to the initial vote whether horse riding should be eliminated as one of the 5 disciplines from the sport, there was also an athlete commission member on the executive board in that role to vote. And because it was such an emergency meeting, as it was labeled, this athlete basically had no possibility to reach out to the athlete community to say, okay, to ask, what is your opinion? Where are we going? But was almost forced to say, okay, now you have to make a decision. But it goes further. And if we see who are the athletes that are being appointed to working groups that should now work towards the replacement of riding, this is not a democratic process, but the federation seems to pick those athletes that speak according to the federation's policies. So again, the majority of the athletes seems to be unable to actually voice and influence the decision-making processes.
I also wanted to check with you whether you saw evidence, because there was discussion around a WhatsApp group that a lot of the athletes who were protesting against the removal of riding formed this WhatsApp group to be able to coordinate their activity, and that group was infiltrated by executive board members of the UIPM.
Yes, that's what I've been told, and where I've also seen screenshots from those WhatsApp groups where there was numbers included and numbers removed that were allegedly belonging to executive board members, and that's also why I'm including that in my story. And certainly another piece of evidence to demonstrate, that there is tension at the very least, but also attempts to exert control, at least. I mean, not even influence or impacting the decisions, but the athletes don't seem to be, those in charge don't want the athletes to be independent and come up with their own ideas for reform or whatever it may be. So
they've been advocating for about 12 months now. There's another Congress coming up for the UIPM. Do you think they're any closer to forcing some sort of a change in the governance of the sport?
No. The athletes themselves are not, I would say. And I hesitate here because we have a couple of issues to deal with, right? We have the athletes movement, which is really what I'm focusing on. But then we also have Alex Watson's candidacy, and then we have the horse riding issue as well. So there is a couple of things, and I think with the foundation of Pentathlon United, which is this independent athletes body, that is a important initiative to demonstrate, okay, we can also unite and try to speak as one voice. And of course, Pentathlon United is supporting Alex's candidacy, as far as I know. So that will be interesting to see, how do those two different developments play together, and how does Alex actually work with the athletes and give them a better chance to be included and listen to their voices. Because my argument in the book is actually saying that the athletes should really come up with their own independent ideas, and try to form real protest and reform to possibly break that whole system down as it is, so it can be newly erected. But how feasible that is I don't know.
Professor Jörg Krieger from Aarhus University and author of Athletes Pressing Charges, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.